Something very strange is happening in the BMW i8 market. Prices are increasing in one part of the market but decreasing in another part of the market, and this is rare. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen this before. But in some way it's ironic that this happens in the i8 market. The strange price development namely fits with the car. It's a bit quirky. The BMW i8 was the first BMW plug-in hybrid and it featured for that time groundbreaking technology. Moreover, even though that the car is now 9 years old, the design still looks futuristic. So think about the buzz that was created during its introduction. Unfortunately for BMW though, that buzz quickly faded away when the ignition was turned on. Automotive journalists criticized the car for a lack of driving involvement and power. The looks didn't match the capabilities and this was reflected in the sales numbers and its residual values. The $150,000 new price dropped rapidly when you drove it out of the showroom. The BMW i8 is no longer in production and exactly this might be the key to its future success. People like what they can't have, something unique and something with a story, and the i8 ticks all of the boxes. Moreover, cars that were heavily criticized during their production cycle often do very well later on. Think for example about 996 Carrera values that increased with 50% during the pandemic, or Defender values. So I think that the BMW i8 has a good chance to go from zero to hero, and we might be already seeing the first signs of that in today's market. Remember that my market update 1 year ago showed that some cars bottom. Let's see how things have developed. And we'll start with an overview of today's i8 market to refresh our memory. Over here we have the US market of April, and you can see that it's split by the generation and the roof type. The model year is displayed on the horizontal axis and the price on the vertical axis. And these prices have quite a story to tell. Look at the difference between the latest models and the older ones. A 2019 Roadster has a median price of $113,000, while this is $75,000 for a 2014 Coupe. That's a crazy price difference for cars that differ only 5 years in age, but it does highlight that the BMW i8 might have been priced too high to begin with. The price level was, by the way, not the only thing that surprised me. We can namely also see that the supply level is high. In total there are 240 cars for sale, and this is a lot more than before. Moreover, there are 100 second-gen Roadsters for sale. That's a lot of cars for one model year compared to the rest of the market. So in some way this market looks different than the other ones that I've analyzed on the channel. Supply is surprisingly high and concentrated, while prices vary a lot depending on the model year. Two things that are not per definition benefiting its future classic status. On the flip side though, the depreciation per 1000 miles is very low. Over here we have the mileage on the horizontal axis and the price on the vertical axis. And this means that the lines show how much the car loses per 1000 miles driven. For the second generation Roadster this is 0.6%, for the second generation Coupe 0.5%, and for the first generation Coupe only 0.3%. And especially this last score is excellent. There are not many cars that are so insensitive to mileage increases as the i8. Naturally though, you need to interpret these numbers as averages. You can see that the lines are steeper for low mileage cars than for high mileage cars, hereby showing that the mileage sensitivity decreases when you add mileage. But I think we're now up to date on today's market, and that means that it's time to place these numbers in a context. You see, there are a few things you need to know about the BMW i8 market. The first one has to do with the price development over time. Second generation cars continued to decrease during the pandemic, while first generation cars increased. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this is very special and I don't think that I've seen it before. The difference between the market segments is extraordinary, so let's investigate what happened. If we start with the second generation, we can see that there's a massive price decrease of $47,000 between October 2019 and October 2020. And this price decrease is fully caused by new 2019 cars that gathered their first miles. On average, a new car gathered 2,000 miles between these two dates, and as you can see, these were expensive miles. The car lost almost 30% in its first year. And this highlights an important problem for the i8 and might explain the low sales numbers. The car was simply too expensive for what it was offering. The i8 is not the only car that has this problem or this extreme depreciation rate. We can see the same in the Aston Martin market. Both cars ranked then also at the top of the depreciation leaderboard, and that's the board where you don't want to be in the lead. Nevertheless, after this drop of almost $50,000, the cars are perhaps closer to where they should have been priced in the first place. Prices stabilized at this price level, but also this is not exactly good news, Between October 2020 and May 2021, the uncertainty surrounding the pandemic decreased and values for most cars increased rapidly. Unfortunately, for the second generation i8 though, the driving forces behind these value increases were only strong enough to prevent a further price decrease. The median price between these two dates actually only differs by a few dollars. The market remained frozen. After this period, we slowly started to see that price trends started to flatten, but as you maybe expected, for the second generation i8 this meant a continuation of its depreciation. Between May 2020 and now, the car lost $9,000 or roughly 8%. And this price decrease is statistically confirmed, which means that it is unlikely to be the result of chance. Looking at the full period, we can see that prices decreased by 34% or $56,000. But this is actually less than what I predicted back in 2019. And the reason for this is of course the flat development during the pandemic. Now what hopefully won't develop in a flat line is the number of likes for this video. If you enjoy this data-driven way of analyzing the BMW i8 market, please support the channel by clicking on the like button down below. Thank you. If we transition to the first generation, we can see that things are completely different over there. We can see that prices are aligned with the market trend. They increased with 16.2% or $11,000 between October 2019 and May 2021. And this increase is less than what we have seen for some other cars, but all in all it's not a bad result. So why did values for the first generation increase during this period, while values for the second generation decreased during this period? The answer is simple. The first generation cars already took this massive depreciation hit and are now at a price level where supply and demand is more balanced. Prices are at a level where people are actually considering an i8. On top of this comes that the traditional depreciation effect, consisting out of the depreciation per year and depreciation per 1,000 miles, is a lot lower. The first generation is much older and has a higher mileage. The cars are mostly from 2015 or 2016, while the second gens are mostly from 2019, and the mileage for the first gen car is 10 to 15,000 miles higher. If we continue then by looking at the most recent period, we can see that prices remained flat. Between May 2021 and now, they didn't move, and this is in line with the rest of the market. As I mentioned a few times before, many price trends are flattening now or even topping. Overall, the trend in the first generation market is then also very similar to the market trend. If I quickly add in the 991 Carrera prices, we can see that the two price trends are very similar. They increase till the summer of 2021 and then start to flatten. You can, by the way, click over here if you want to see the full market analysis for the 911. So we saw now that there's a disproportional difference in the price development between the first and the second generation. But there's one more thing you need to know, but it's a bit more nitty-gritty. You see, we can break these price trends down even further, and this reveals that there are some nuances in the price developments for each generation. In the second generation market, it are the new cars pushing prices down, while in the first generation market, the low mileage cars might be increasing more than the other cars. Let's start with the last one. Over here we have the median price, model year and supply development for the first generation, broken down by mileage bucket. For example, the blue line over here shows the price development for the cars between 0 and 15,000 miles. And this reveals that over the full period, prices clearly increased the most for the low mileage cars. And this could be an indication that some i8s are becoming collectibles. In those markets, we usually see that low mileage, one owner cars that are in excellent condition go for large premiums. Now I think it's too early to say with any certainty that that is indeed what's happening here, but it's something to keep in the back of your mind. If we look at the same figure, but for the second generation, then we can see that the enormous price decrease was indeed caused by the new or almost new cars. Prices for the higher mileage cars have been relatively stable. I, by the way, don't trust this last data point over here. As you can see, it's only based on 5 cars. Prices didn't really increase. So, to sum it up, we just saw that low mileage cars increased more than higher mileage cars in the first generation market, and that this perhaps could be the result of those cars transitioning into a collectible status. Ironically, it are the low mileage cars in the second generation market that caused the severe price decrease. But now then, before we conclude, there's a third and final thing you need to know about the BMW i8 market, and that's the supply level. It increased tremendously. Over here we have the supply, median mileage and median model year development. And if we focus on the supply graph, we can see that supply decreased till the end of 2020. After that though, we can see that it increased from 141 to 240 cars, and it's very unusual that you see these extreme moves for cars that are no longer in production. Moreover, we can see that both the first and second generation cars contributed to this, but that it's mainly the second generation that pushed supply up. It nearly doubled from 73 to 139 cars. Now, a possible reason for this can be that the cars are coming soon out of their standard warranty period. And the same applies to the first generation, but to the battery warranty. I believe they come with an 8-year period and they can be expensive to replace. And with that, it's time to wrap up and conclude. We saw that the BMW i8 market is characterized by an extremely high depreciation rate. New cars lost a ton of money, and this currently shows in the price development for the second generation cars. Notwithstanding the price surge during the pandemic, second gen values continue to plummet. The depreciation effect is simply very strong. The first gen cars on the other hand followed the market, and we saw that prices increased last year and are now more or less flat. We even saw that low mileage cars increased more than the rest of the market, and that this might mean that some i8s are approaching a collectible status, but it's too early to really confirm this. So what about the future development of i8 prices? Well, I think that especially the first generation has a lot going for it. It's past its first depreciation hit and prices have been stable or even increased. This is very much in line with the rest of the market. Therefore, I think it's fair to expect that prices will continue to follow the rest of the market in the near-term future. So this means a stable price development or a slight price decrease. In combination with a low depreciation per 1000 miles, this means that it should be possible to drive this car for a while without losing any money on it or losing only a bit. Looking at the longer term, they might separate themselves from the rest of the market trend, as this is really a car with a unique story. But then again, we don't see this yet in the prices. Now that was basically the good part of the story. If we look at the risks or the things that might cause prices to decrease, the supply level pops up. Supply increases were severe during last year, and usually this is not a good sign for prices. There needs to be sufficient demand, and the question is whether that will be there. The i8 is a complex car, and this means that the repair bills can be high if you don't have a warranty in place. And this in turn could scare people away and draw them to, for example, a 991 Carrera. In any case, it will be interesting to see how things unfold and if prices for the first generation will hold now that the market seems to be cooling off. If you want to stay up to date on the prices, I recommend that you subscribe to the channel so you get notified when the next BMW i8 analysis goes live. And with that, we arrived at the end of the video. Now, if you enjoyed this data-driven way of analyzing cars but would have liked to see the same analysis but for a different car than the i8, then I recommend that you let me know down below in the comment section for which car you would like to see an analysis. Once there are enough requests for a certain car, I will make a video about it. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next week for a new video.